So they've zoomed me into the first photograph. Interpreting 19th and early 20th century photographs of the Grand Canyon, religion, science, art history, and tourism. How does one understand images of the Colorado River's Grand Canyon and the surrounding plateau? 19th century photographers were as fascinated by the canyon, the strange desert rock formations, and mysterious fissures as we are today. How have images by O'Sullivan, Henry Jackson, and others been interpreted by themselves, contemporaneous peers, and scholars? This paper briefly outlines the multivariant reception and methods for unpacking selected photographs and their inspirational content through the frames of religion, science, art history, and tourism. We will alight on the ironic role of manifest destiny in regard to the canyon, theories of geologist and theologian Clarence King, scientist Charles Darwin, philosopher Joel Snyder, art historians Novak, Krauss, and Saylor will be brought to bear on the exegesis of a landscape that continues to evoke inspiration. Even before it was a national park, it commanded attention and violent competition of various parties on the Western surveys. When F.S. Dellenbaugh proposed the national park to President Taft, the goal was for a much larger allocation. In this map, you see the boundary that was recommended by F.S. Dellenbaugh initially, recommended to President Taft. And the second map is a slightly later version of the park. The canyon, like the Rockies, has become synonymous with the idea of America, its vastness, and rightfully so. There are breathtaking canyons in, for example, eastern France near Ornon in the Jura Mountains range on the border of Switzerland, which you see here, and also other canyons in the United States, for example, the Grand Canyon of Yellowstone, here featured in a 1937 New York Herald double spread about Jackson, that contribute to our idea of the landscape. In the West, however, the Grand Canyon is the Grand Canyon of the Colorado, passing through Arizona. The scale of the Grand Canyon is without comparison. It symbolizes multiple ideas at the same time. It is, of course, a very specific place, but the concern here is not so much the place, the canyon, and its explorers, as the manner in which the landscape, with an eye in the direction of the Grand Canyon, is interpreted. Broadly speaking, religion creates two lenses for interpreting Western landscape. Under that rubric, consider first the idea of manifest destiny. During the 19th century, many, not all people, subscribed to the belief that not a scientific position like Newton's gravity or an historical document like the Magna Carta, that the United States, a political entity, was destined by God, a Christian God, to have possession and inhabit the Western territories. So you already saw that image of the territories. In photography, the notion of manifest destiny and the Western landscape, if not the Grand Canyon area, is perhaps best exemplified by Jackson's Mountain of the Holy Cross, an image of a cross in the snow-filled crevices of a Colorado mountain facade. Jackson himself wrote about the site in his 1940 autobiography, Time Exposure. In his manner of expression, one can detect the religious undertone. Quote, "In the Middle Ages, there was the legend of the Holy Grail. In Colorado, there was the legend of a snowy cross upon a mountain." And a little further, he writes, "Near the top of the ridge, I emerged above the timberline and clouds, and suddenly, as I clambered over a vast mass of jagged rocks, I discovered the great shining cross dead before me, tilted against the mountainside." In the first sentence, he's comparing the snow in the mountain cracks to the cup or platter used by Jesus at the Last Supper and Joseph of Arimathea to collect the blood of Jesus at his crucifixion. In the second sentence, the description of the cross employing the word shining suggests it is metal and by association a liturgical item, and that it is leaning against the facade of the mountainside. Both sentences rhetorically reinforce the Christian association of manifest destiny. Turning to the Grand Canyon, the concept of manifest destiny has a particular quirk. John Wesley Powell, who led the 1869 journey down the canyon, was notoriously opposed to the idea of manifest destiny, embraced by so many others. Powell considered the West too dry and not really inhabitable. Throughout his life, he was in tension with expansionists over the topic. The second idea that arguably falls under the religion umbrella involves the theories of biologist Charles Darwin versus theologian and geologist Clarence King. And oddly, this has a lot of resonance in the 21st century, another topic. Here, science and religion become entangled. In 1859, Darwin first published Origin of the Species, in which he argues for slow evolution involving survival of the fittest. His ideas were problematic for many in the 19th century, for many of his contemporaries, because the theories did not neatly square with biblical tales. One counterposition was that of Clarence King, who maintained that the earth changed due to intermittent telluric catastrophes, upheavals, or ruptures. King, wearing the hat of a scientist and theologian, offered concepts more palatable to some because the notion of dramatic ruptures was paradoxically less a break with religion. King's curious combination of science and religion is apparent in his 1877 Yale commencement speech. First, he frames his comment in terms of man's empirical knowledge of the place. A bit further into the lecture, King evokes the idea of God in terms of catastrophism. Admittedly, the role of Clarence King was more prominent between 1868 and 72, when O'Sullivan was making photographs for the Geological Survey in which King was in charge. Photo historian Joel Snyder argues that the photographs of O'Sullivan, for example, the dramatic tufa and streaming fissures for example, the dramatic tufa domes have a sympathetic resonance with King's notions. Snyder argues that O'Sullivan is not illustrating King's theories. At least there is no extant document supporting this interpretation. It is, however, likely that O'Sullivan was aware of the theory and the photographs may be interpreted in light of King's position. Obviously, King was not on the Powell expedition, but there is every reason to think about the Grand Canyon there's every reason to think about the Grand Canyon in terms of dramatic telluric changes. Consider the description, The Secret Knowledge of Water, quote, "Most of a year's precipitation can easily be unloaded in 6 minutes, while a mile away the ground might not even be dampened. Such a deluge would support King's view of geology and easily corroborate biblical views of the Earth's dramatic geological history." I'm not saying I subscribe to those, I'm just giving you the 19th century view. Turning to the discipline of art history, two theories may be brought to bear on photographs of the Grand Canyon. The first is an idea used to understand Western landscape painting, specifically that articulated by Barbara Novak in American Painting of the 19th Century. Novak leveraged the concept of transcendentalism and used it to interpret paintings. Transcendentalism, a concept associated with Ralph Waldo Emerson, William Henry Thoreau, and Margaret Fuller, emerged in the 1830s as a reaction to rationalism. Based on the ideas of Kant, the transcendentalists saw a divinity or perhaps animism in all nature and humanity. They put an accent on the phenomenological process that mediated all experience, an approach that has been expanded in recent literature. In the context of transcendentalism, Novak, building on an essay by John Bauer, articulates a painting style called luminism, defined by expansive horizons, mathematical precision, light, and often reflectivity. She writes, The landscape artist could value the smallest fact in nature and also embrace the larger equivalence of God with nature through infinite space or otherworldly light. Novak explains, if we say that impressionism is the objective response to visual sensation of light, then perhaps we can say luminism is the poetic response to the felt sensation. She stresses luminism in American painting of the mid-19th century. Subsequently, one might use the idea of luminism as a method of interpreting selected landscape photographs. In the colored postcard titled Fishing in the Colorado River, Grand Canyon of Arizona, published by the Detroit Publishing Company, one sees the glass surface of the river and the saturated color. Regarding aesthetics, one might also ask, is this image an objective response to the visual sensation of light or a poetic response to the felt sensation? On another note, the Detroit Publishing Company produced postcards and stereo cards. The images of the West were reproduced and distributed in multiple formats. In the late 20th century, Western landscape photographs were exhibited in art museums and became part of the modernist art canon. Rosalind Krauss challenged the leveraging of Western landscape photography into the modernist art canon. In a 1982 Art Journal article titled Photography's Discursive Spaces, Krauss argues that the value or meaning of a photograph is to be found in the photograph's places of exhibition, not the image. She wrote, quote, "Everywhere at present, there is an attempt to dismantle the photographic archive, the set of practices, institutions, and relationships to which 19th century photography originally belonged, and to reassemble it within the categories previously constituted by art and its history. It's not hard to conceive of what the inducements are for doing so, but it is more difficult to understand the tolerance for the kind of incoherence it produces." Irritated by the unfolding of modern art history, an angry Rosalind Krauss dismembers the arguments of those who went before her. Since our purpose is not to be a gatekeeper to what constitutes modern art, the notion that can be harvested from Krauss's essay is that a photograph's discursive spaces and different discourses generated by those spaces establish distinct meanings. Turning again to the postcards and stereo cards, the viewer engages in tourism and more precisely armchair travel. What do these stereo cards do? How do they really work? If one is yards from the rim of the canyon, okay, and we are, it is fiercely clear that the stereo card, this big, right, the stereo cards do not really give you the feel of the canyon or even the look of it, which might be better accomplished by rereading Burke's 18th century essay on the sublime. The stereo cards function in at least 4 ways. They leverage the landscape into a global picture business, allowing certain individuals to make money. They promote constructs of American landscape. In reinforcing these images, they enhance nationalism. They provide easy pleasure to the viewer, an opportunity to sit quietly at home and travel to distant places. They engage the imagination and stimulate the desire to travel. And they do this without giving the viewer any real idea of the experience of the Grand Canyon. Sometimes the quality of the photograph to have collapsed picture planes due to the particular lens employed actually inverts the size of the canyon, making it seem smaller than it is when you witness it. To overcome the tendency of the camera lens to collapse space, thus undermining the vastness of the canyon, one often finds photographers, including O'Sullivan, emphasizing the dramatic rock formations framing the image. And you see this in this O'Sullivan photograph. In the case of the well-known Cole brothers, images reinforcing visual drama and their physical prowess are at play. Their body of work and their work of the body has become part of the nostalgia for the early days of the Grand Canyon exploration, and as such another aspect of tourism. And this has been exemplified in Rachel Saylor's book, where she pinpoints the tourism aspect. To recap, tourism joined at the hip with nationalism. Art history, science, and religion provide ways of understanding early images and specifically photographs of the Grand Canyon. In conclusion, I'd like to add a personal reflection. While preparing this talk, a friend who's strong enough to have been part of Powell's expedition was reading aloud sections of Edward Dulnick's book, Down the Great Unknown. It struck me how dramatically different Powell's journey might sound to someone who actually could have been a member of one of the early expeditions, some of you in this audience. However, even had I been born in the 19th century, I can assure you I would not have been on one of the early exploratory trips. I asked myself, is this limitation strictly a function of gender? I don't think so. There are plenty of men who would not really qualify for Powell's expedition. And then there are women of European descent who visited and resided near the canyon. And for this, I would defer to Betty Levengood's book, Grand Canyon Women. During the last half century, the number of individuals who have visited the national park has more than doubled. One might see that as an expansion of privilege, or on the other hand, an irritation to some residing in and near the Grand Canyon, or perhaps an environmental problem. Regardless of the political position one might have to parkland access, the multiple modes of mediating the park, religion, science, art history, and tourism have animated the imagination of the American public and those beyond this country and democratized access to a sublime place. Thank you.